Hello, Father Fred here. Last week we did chapter 12 and 20. That was kind of a combination. We could go from chapter 12 to chapter 20. Today we're going to do chapter 13. And as always, I would ask you to go to chapter 1 and start with 1 and then 2 and 3 and keep it in order. It's going to make a whole lot more sense for you. Now, last week we also came up with another writer. He was a writer we called E, and he was from the northern kingdom. And from the southern kingdom, we called him J. And they were just about the same. They had a little bit of a difference. They both tell stories, but in the E, from the north, they also have a lot of angels and dreams. So we're going to see some more of J and E. But for right now, we'll just remember that Abram got a call from God to come out of Ur. U-R. That was the place he's from. U-R, 2 letters. He was called to go from Ur. He's going to go to Canaan, but he can't go straight across, because if he does, it's through the desert, and there are tribes there that are savage. So he's going to save himself that, even though he has to travel a lot farther. Now, on chapter 12, I left a little chart that shows the steps that Abram took to go from where he was from Ur to Haran, down into the south, and then on down through the desert, and finally into Egypt. And you remember down in Egypt, he was, where he told his wife to tell people, everybody, that was his sister. Well, a couple of places that he stops. One of them is named Shechem, and that's going to be one of the most important religious, and still is, for the Jews in Israel. And he built his first altar there. Then he goes on to Bethel, which is just a little distance from there, just about 10 miles north of Jerusalem, and he builds an altar there. And then finally, he goes into the Negev, which is the desert, and then he and his wife get down into Egypt, and that's where he says, "Tell them that you are my sister." And he got a whole bunch of cattle and stuff for that. Now, let's go from there. Now, starting with chapter 13, and we're going to reverse the order. He's in Egypt, and he's going to come back out. So I'll just read from the scriptures. Verse 1 in chapter 13 says, "From Egypt," now that's where he is, "he went up to the Negev," that's the desert, in the southern part of Israel. He went up to the Negev with his wife and all that belonged to him. And here's something that's thrown in, "and Lot went with him." Now, it doesn't say anything about Lot going down with him. So he wasn't important to the story there. He's going to be important to this story, because he's going to have some things that take place there that he has to be in. So now we got Lot back in the picture. Verse 2 says, "Now Abram was very rich in livestock, silver, and gold." And we know how he got that, by having his wife tell her that he's her sister. And then, so that they won't get a curse put on them, they give the king and the Pharaoh, they give all of these things to Abram, just so they won't have a curse. Verse 3 says, "From the Negev, he traveled in stages toward Bethel," going right back to where he was, "to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had formerly stood." That's where he was camped when he was coming down from the north. Now he's going back up toward the north. And as he's going up, these are steps that people would take that had cattle or had sheep. They would take them to one place, and when they ate all the grass, they'd move them on up and move them on up. And this is the way they would go step by step as he's going. "The site where he had first built the altar, and there Abram invoked the Lord by name." That's where he started talking with God. Verse 5 says, "Lot went with Abram and also had flocks and herds and tents." Now, we don't know how he got that. We know how Abram got his. Did Abram give his part of his? I doubt that. Lot got it some way. Or, well, this is just the way the reader wants to put it, because they're going to have so many on each side that they have to separate. And it wouldn't do any good if Lot didn't have animals. They wouldn't be separating. So that's just part of the story that it's telling. Verse 6 says, so that the land could not support them if they stayed together, their possessions were so great that they could not live together. That's why Lot is there, and that's why he has all these possessions, so that they have to separate. Verse 7 says, there were quarrels among the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herders of Lot's livestock. At this time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land. Now remember that. They are living in the land, the Perizzites and the Canaanites. But look at this next verse. Verse 8 says, so Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife between you and me, or between your herders and my herders, for we are kindred. And listen, is not the whole land available? No, the whole land is not available. But according to this storyteller, it's going to be available because God is going to give it to them. He says this, please separate from me. If you prefer the left, I'll go to the right. If you prefer the right, I'll go to the left. Now, Abram is the older one. He should get the first choice. But they make Abram a pretty good guy. He's going to let Lot choose, and he's just going to take what's left. Verse 10 says, Lot looked around and saw how abundantly watered the whole Jordan plain was, as far as Zoar, like the Lord's own garden, or like Egypt. Egypt must have been a really, really fertile place, because it's comparing it to the Garden of Eden. This was before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So this is going to be ironic. Abram lets Lot pick what he wants, and Lot picks this fertile land where Sodom and Gomorrah are, but it's not going to be fertile all the time because something's going to happen pretty soon. And that Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be the worst land around. So Abram, even though he's the one that gives in, he's the one that's going to be blessed by God. Verse 12 says, Abram settled in the land of Canaan. Yeah, that's Canaan. Why is he settling in Canaan? There are Canaanites there. What are they thinking, I wonder? Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the plain, pitching his tents near Sodom. He's got even cities, not just countryside. He's going to be rooting cities that there are other people that are already there. Now the inhabitants of Sodom were wicked. They were great sinners against the Lord. Now when you see the word Lord, you know that's the J source. They were sinners against the Lord. So they're setting this up because Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed. Verse 14 says, after Lot had parted from him, the Lord said to Abram. Now, two things here tells you that it's from the J source. From it's the Lord, everybody else uses God. The north uses God, and the P source uses God. The J source is only for the ones in Jerusalem. And also, the Lord is talking to Abram just like you and I would talk to one another. So we'll go back and get that one. After Lot had parted from him, the Lord said to Abram, look about you, and from where you are, gaze to the north and the south and the east and the west, and all of the land that you see, I will give to you and your descendants forever. God is sure making it tough on these Canaanites and Jebusites. He's going to give them all of the land, all of it. That's going to be their He's promised that. That's going to be their promised land. And so verse 16 says, I will make your descendants like the dust of the earth. Later on, he's going to say, I'll make them like the stars in the sky. It means you can't count them. But the crazy thing is, he's been married now for probably 60, 65 years, no children, and he's going to be the father of all these nations. He has to be wondering what's going on because he doesn't know what God has in mind for him here. Verse 16 again says, I will make your descendants like the dust of the earth. If anyone could count the dust of the earth, your descendants too might be counted. In other words, nobody can count all yours. Verse 17 says, get up and walk through the land, across its length all the way along, and across its breadth all the way across, for I give it to you. So that's all of it. When he can walk, wherever he can walk, he's going to take possession. He's going to walk all the way across it and all the way length of it, and it's going to all be his. And what about those poor people that are there? They're going to have to leave their homes or get killed probably. Verse 17 says, 18, Abram moved his tents and went on to settle near, and here's something that we'll always remember. He settled by the oak of Mamre. He settled by a tree. Trees are important. Settled by the oak of Mamre, which is at Hebron. Hebron's in the south. And there he built an altar to the Lord. So wherever he goes now, he tries to build an altar to the Lord. So let's just recap chapter 13 before we jump to 14. And we're going to 2 because they're pretty short. In chapter 13, Abram reverses. He came down from the north. Now he's going back to from the south. He's going to be now in the promised land. He only went down south because there was a famine, remember. That's why he had to go down to Egypt. And Abram and Lot agree to part ways because they got so many animals, so much bigger flock. Their herdsmen were already starting to fight with one another. Abram is the oldest. He's got the right to choose what he wants, but he lets Lot choose. So you'd actually think, why does God not choose Lot instead of Abraham? Because Lot is young. He can have children. Abraham, he should be over the hill. Lot picked the land that was lush and fertile for a little while. Lot's choice was ironic. It's ironic because this land is going to be destroyed by Yahweh. It's going to be wiped out. And finally, Abram settles near the oak tree in Mamre. Now, that's the last of chapter 13. We're going to go into chapter 14 now. And chapter 14 is something, it doesn't have anything to do with anything else. As scholars study these and try to pick out who the different writers are, this chapter does not fit into any category. It's like it's come from the moon or something. But chapter 14 starts out, it's a battle about 4 kings that are going to do battle with 5 kings. Now, where the 5 kings are is where Sodom and Gomorrah are. Now, we're not going to go through all of those battles that they got, but let's turn in chapter 14 to verse 10 and see what it says. Verse 10 says, the battle is ending now. Now the valley of Sidon was full of bitumen pits like tar. You get in there, you can't get out. It's not kind of like quicksand, but it's sticky. You can't get out. And as the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah fled, they fell into these while the rest fled to the mountains. Why did just the 2 kings fall in? Maybe it's telling us that it's not going to be just the kings, it's going to be the whole country that is going to be wiped out. Verse 11 says, the victors, now these are the ones in the north, they won the battle, and the victors seized all the possessions and food supplies of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they went their way. They took everything. They took with them also Abram's nephew Lot. You remember, he's living there. And so they got him now. And that's going to make Abram angry. They're going to take the nephew Lot, who had been living in Sodom, as well as his possessions, and they got out of there. Verse 13 says, a survivor, somebody got away. Somebody has to get away to keep the story going. A survivor came and brought the news to Abram the Hebrew. Now, the word Hebrew was used for these people before they were called Israelites, because they hadn't settled in Israel yet, so they just called Hebrews. Who was camping where was he camping? At the oak of Mamre. Remember these trees, they're going to be all through here. Other than the God and people, trees and mountains are the 2 most often words used, the things that are talked about. A survivor came and brought the news to Abram the Hebrew, who was camping at the oak of Mamre, the Amorite, a kinsman of Eshcol and Abner. These were the allies of Abram. So he's got a couple of guys with him. When Abram heard that his kinsman had been captured, he mustered 318 of his retainers. Retainers are soldiers that he keeps around to protect, for protection for battles. 318 of his retainers, both in his house. You know they're not in his house. That means it has to be the house of Abraham, means all of what Abraham would be included in, all of his. Born in his house, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Now, we're going to get a map pretty soon of Israel, and Dan is going to be the farthest place in the north, and he's just about the farthest place in the south, down at Sodom and Gomorrah and in Hebron. That's in the south. They're going to go all the way up to get those 4 kings that came down from the north and took everything from Sodom and Gomorrah. He and his servants deployed against them at night. And it doesn't say anything about really a struggle. They defeated them. That's all it says. They defeated them and pursued them as far as Hobab, which is north of Damascus. Damascus is in Lebanon. They were clear out of the country by the time they caught them. But they caught him. And he's got his nephew now. He recovered all the possessions. He also recovered his kinsman Lot. He's got Lot now. They hadn't done anything to him. And his possessions, along with the women and the other people. Now, you got the women. You killed the soldiers. Wonder who the other people are. Maybe they're kids. Maybe they're old people. But it says the women and other people. You'd think almost like women weren't people or something. Verse 17 says, when Abram returned from his defeat at Chedorlaomer, who were allied with him, the king of Sodom went out to greet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. So now Abram is coming back with all of the loot and his relative. And here is the most important thing maybe in this chapter, maybe in this first part of the Bible. Just out of the blue, majestically comes verse 18, Melchizedek, a king of Salem. Now Salem is also used as a name for Jerusalem. Jerusalem ends with Salem. Melchizedek, it never tells anything about his parents, never where he goes. He just appears and disappears. And we just had him 2 or 3 times more in the Bible, in the Psalms and in Hebrews. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now, what do you think bread and wine would refer to? If you're Catholic, you have an idea for yourself anyway, don't you? It's the Eucharist here. And this Melchizedek is a pre-knowledge pointing toward Jesus. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was a priest of God Most High. God Most High. Now, are there more than one gods? Maybe, back in chapter 1 of Genesis, it says, let us make man and woman in our image. Some people say that's the Trinity. Some people say that is a council of gods. And this is the Most High God. He blessed Abram with these words, blessed be Abram by God Most High, the creator of heaven and earth. And also, just as much as you blessed God, and blessed be God Most High, who delivered your foes into your hand. That's what that God did. God was the one that won that battle. Then Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. He gives 1/10 of everything of what? Of what he's taken from these people? Because he's not going to wind up with anything. He's just going to give 1/10 to Melchizedek, but he's not going to keep the rest of it either. The king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the captives. What's he got? Why should he get the captives? He wasn't in any battle. He lost the battle. The king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the captives, the goods you may keep. You can keep all the cattle and everything else. But Abram doesn't want anything. The only thing Abram wants is not from this world, it's from God. So he tells him this. But Abram replied to the king of Sodom, I have sworn to the Lord God, Most High, the creator of heaven and earth, that I would not take so much as a thread or a sandal strap from anything that is yours. He doesn't want anything. Why? So that you cannot say, I made Adam rich. Adam is not trying to get rich with wealth. He's going to be rich with the Spirit of God. And the very last verse says, nothing for me, nothing, except what my servants here consumed, and the share that is due to the men who went with me, Abner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their share, but nothing for me. Abraham is not in this for material goods. Chapter 14 was about this. There's a battle. 4 kings in the north come down and fight 5 kings in the south. They win. They take all of their belongings, all their possessions, and they take Lot. And Abraham gets angry. So Abraham goes out and by himself, what the 5 kings couldn't do, he goes by himself, and he does it because God delivered these people into his hands. And he brings back everything else in Lot. And maybe the most important part is Melchizedek. He is the king of Salem, which is also referred to would be the king of Jerusalem, which would be Jesus. And he brings out bread and wine. And if you're Catholic, that's going to mean something special to you. And he blesses Abram and receives a tithe from him. Abram's given a tithe to him. Abram is the prophet, but he's going to give tithe to somebody higher than he is, which is Melchizedek. He gives everything to Melchizedek. Well, we've covered 2 chapters now, chapter 13 and 14. You don't want to miss chapter 15 because this old man is going to be 100 years old and he's going to be the father of many nations, and he doesn't have a child. He is 10 years older than I am. I was 90 years old yesterday. God has blessed me so much. I was 90 years old yesterday, and I have received so many wonderful cards and phone calls, and I want to thank everybody that has just sent me with your love and with your caring. That's the only thing that matters in this world, is what we are to one another. And I am so blessed with health and with friends, with people that love me as I love them. Now, I'd like for you to do this, just like always I end with this. You write me down a comment. Let me know what you're thinking. And share it with other people. And if you want to use this, if you're Catholic, you might not have any way to study the Bible and you don't know where to start. Just use these lessons if you want. And get together with other Catholics and study it. and find the peace of Jesus for you and for your family for the rest of your life. God bless you.